My apologies, sir. We'll handle this right away.
Are you all right?
I'm so sorry.
Perfectly fine, thank you.
I apologize for the disturbance, sir. Everything is secure now. Enjoy your evening.
The restaurant buzz of muted, steady hum, the clink of silverware, low laughter, and the gentle shuffle waitstaff. But for Jasmine, everything felt heavier tonight. Her palms were slick with sweat as she approached table 6, where a middle-aged white couple sat. The man, in his crisp suit and polished shoes, smiled up at her with the fake politeness he reserved for service workers. "Can you hurry it up? I've got a meeting to get to," he said, his voice coated with thinly veiled impatience. Jasmine swallowed her frustration. Not tonight, she told herself. Not tonight. She placed the drinks on the table, careful not to spill. But as she leaned over to serve their entrees, his hand brushed against her wrist, just long enough to make her skin crawl. She looked up, meeting his eyes. The smile never reached them. "Careful there," he said. "Don't want to break anything." She froze. The tray felt heavier than ever, the weight of the moment sinking in. But it wasn't the tray that had broken. It was something deeper. A sharp crack sounded as the tray slipped from her hand and hit the floor, its contents spilling across the tile. Jasmine's face burned, but before she could speak, the man's voice rang out, a sneer creeping into his words. "Figures, a clumsy one. Can't even carry a tray properly." The entire restaurant fell silent, all eyes on her. Jasmine froze, her body paralyzed by humiliation and rage. But before she could pull herself together, the man added, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe you should be working somewhere you belong, huh?" The words sliced through her, louder than any crash. The floor, the people, the air, it all vanished. All that was left was his voice, drowning her out, echoing in her ears. Jasmine took a deep breath, willing herself to smile as she approached table 6. The couple sat in the corner, the man leaning back in his chair, his silver watch catching the light in that way rich people always seem to manage. She could hear their conversation, a steady murmur of pleasantries as she made her way over. It was another Friday night, the restaurant busy with the usual crowd, high and upscale, people who expected flawless service and barely acknowledged the hard work that went into getting them their perfect meals. "Evening," she said, her voice steady, her eyes trained on the tray of drinks she was carrying. The low hum of the restaurant buzzed around her, but for a moment, it felt like everything slowed. Every step felt deliberate, like if she didn't focus, it would all slip away. The man smiled up at her. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a kind of smile that left a bad taste in your mouth. "Can you hurry it up? My meeting's in 10. Jasmine's grip tightened on the tray. She didn't respond. She just nodded, carefully placing the drinks in front of them. The clink of glass against the table was louder than it should have been. The man looked at her, his gaze lingering a little too long. Before he leaned forward, the edge of his voice cutting through the air. "Careful there," he said, his tone too casual, as if he were talking about a minor inconvenience. "You wouldn't want to drop something." The words landed like a slap, stinging, yet she couldn't show any weakness. She smiled back, the kind of smile you gave when you were dying inside, but knew you had to keep moving. She reached for the plates to set them down, her hands a little too shaky now, betraying the calmness she tried so hard to project. As she leaned over, the tray felt heavy in her hands. The man's fingers brushed against her wrist. It was a brief touch, just long enough for her to feel the way he lingered there, as if he were marking her, making sure she knew her place. She froze for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. His touch, light but insistent, made her stomach twist. The way his hand didn't pull away, the smugness in his eyes, it was all too familiar. And then in one sudden movement it happened. The tray slipped. Everything spilled. The clatter of glass and food hitting the floor seemed to echo through the entire restaurant, louder than the murmur of conversations, louder than the sizzling in the kitchen. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the mess, the broken glass reflecting light from overhead, and for a second it felt like time had stopped. The man didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. Instead, he laughed, softly, almost mockingly. "Figures," he said, his voice thick with disdain. A clumsy one. Can't even carry a tray properly. The laughter his wife joined in, but it was his words that seared through her. A jolt of humiliation shot through her chest, the sting of his voice cutting deeper than any glass could. Jasmine stood there, frozen, unable to speak. The room around her seemed to go quiet, save for the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She wanted to disappear, wanted to melt into the floor, and never have to hear that voice again. But before she could recover, he leaned back, his eyes never leaving her face. Maybe you should be working somewhere you belong, huh? The words hung in the air, sharp and biting. Belong. Her stomach lurched, and humiliation deepened. The world seemed to shift, everything around her becoming a blur as the sting of his words burned in her chest. Jasmine couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was stand there, the broken tray still lying in front of her like some cruel reminder of how easily she could be discarded. Her face felt hot, her eyes stinging with the sudden weight of her emotions. She wasn't sure if she wanted to scream, cry, or fight back, but all she could do was stand there, shaking, as the restaurant's murmurs returned, muffled, distant. And in that moment, as the customers resumed their meals, her place in the world felt clearer than ever. She was just a waitress, a nobody, invisible until it was convenient. The secret that had always lingered in the back of her mind had finally come into full view. She wasn't seen, not for who she was, not for what she brought to the table. She was only seen for how much they could belittle her without consequence. As she turned away, her eyes blurry with unshed tears, the sound of the tray breaking replayed over and over in her mind, like a cruel echo that wouldn't stop. Jasmine's legs felt heavy as she walked back to the kitchen. The hustle of the restaurant continued around her, the laughter, the clatter, the hum of conversation. But she was somewhere else entirely. The broken tray, the man's sneering words, the way everyone had turned a blind eye. It all replayed in her mind, a loop of humiliation she couldn't escape. She pushed through the kitchen door, almost knocking it off its hinges in her haste to get away from the world outside. The warmth of the kitchen hit her, the familiar sense of sizzling food, but none of it felt right. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to calm herself. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, but instead, she pressed her hands to the countertop, steadying herself. "Jazz, you good?" The voice of her co-worker, Tamika, cut through the fog of her thoughts. Tamika was older, a mother of two, someone who had been working at the restaurant long before Jasmine had even started. She was one of the few who had noticed what had happened. Jasmine didn't answer at first. Instead, she stared at the floor, willing herself to stop shaking. "Don't let them see you like this," she told herself. But it was too late. The tears welled up before she could stop them, and frustration bubbled over. She let out a small sob, quickly pressing the back of her hand to her mouth to stifle it. Tamika didn't hesitate. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "What happened?" Jasmine shook her head, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her uniform. He humiliated me, Tamika, in front of everyone. He called me. He said I didn't belong here." Tamika's face softened, a flicker of understanding passing through her eyes. "That man, the one who's always acting like he owns a place?" "Yeah, the one." Jasmine's voice cracked as she spoke, the anger and shame threatening to choke her. "And no one did anything. No one said a word." Tamika let out a heavy sigh and crossed her arms, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "You gotta understand, Jazz, it's not just him. It's the way things work around here. The way they treat us. They see us as staff, not people." Jasmine's heart sank. "I know, but it still hurts. I don't know if I can take it anymore." For a moment, the kitchen fell silent, save for the rhythmic chopping and sizzling of the cooks in the back. Jasmine felt the weight of Tamika's gaze on her, and the understanding there stung more than the humiliation. "Jazz, listen to me," Tamika said, her voice low but full of conviction. "I've been here too long, and I've seen things I wish I could forget, but you're not alone. If you let them, they'll walk all over you, and they'll never look back. But if you speak up, if you stand up for yourself, they'll see you. They'll have to see you. Trust me." Jasmine looked up at Tamika, her eyes filled with both doubt and longing. But what if they don't? What if they just fire me? What if nothing changes? Tamika's expression hardened. "Then we fight. Together. You're not just some clumsy girl who can't carry a tray. You've got a voice, Jazz. Don't let them take that from you." Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind spinning. The thought of standing up to the man, or worse, the thought of confronting her manager, made her stomach turn. The last thing she wanted was to be the troublemaker, the one who caused problems. But deep down, something inside her shifted. Maybe Tamika was right. Maybe if she didn't say something, nothing would change. The sound of the kitchen door swung open, and a voice called out from the dining room. "Jasmine, table 5's waiting." Jasmine nodded, wiping the last of her tears away. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the world again, but she didn't have much of a choice. She grabbed a new tray, this one lighter. Somehow, maybe it was because she wasn't carrying the weight of that man's words anymore. As she stepped back into the dining area, her eyes scanned the room, avoiding the gaze of table 6, where the man still sat with his smug smile. The laughter from earlier still hung in the air, but Jasmine was determined not to let it get to her. But as she passed by, she overheard a conversation between two of her co-workers, Amanda and Luke. They were standing by the bar, talking in hushed voices, but Jasmine could hear every word. "She's acting like she's some kind of martyr now," Amanda said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "Why can't she just take it? It's not like it's the first time he said something." "Yeah," Luke added, his voice too loud, as if he didn't care who overheard. "She's got to learn to deal with it. We all do." The words hit Jasmine like a slap to the face. She stopped in her tracks, the tray almost slipping from her hands. She wanted to turn around, to shout at them, to demand they see her, really see her, but she stayed silent, her jaw clenched. It wasn't worth it. Not here. Not now. She pushed the thought away as best as she could, but it lingered, gnawing at her insides. The indifference, the silence, the way people would rather ignore what was happening right in front of them, all felt suffocating. But the worst part? She couldn't help but feel like part of the problem. How many times had she let it slide? How many times had she looked away? She set the tray down on the table and smiled at the guests, but it was a hollow smile. She didn't know if she was smiling for them or for herself, and as she turned to leave, she realized something. If she didn't speak up, if she didn't make them listen, no one else would. The air in the restaurant felt thicker than usual that afternoon. The afternoon rush was starting to die down, but Jasmine still felt a tightness in her chest. Her shift had already been one of the most emotionally draining days in a long time, but it wasn't over yet. She could feel it in her bones. Something was going to happen, something that would make her decision for her, whether she liked it or not. As the hours ticked by, Jasmine moved from table to table, her movements mechanical. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and did her best not to let the tension she was feeling seep into her work. It wasn't easy. The weight of the incident with the man at table 6 still hung over her, like a cloud she couldn't shake. Every time she passed him, her stomach twisted. But it wasn't just him. It was the way everyone around her seemed to turn a blind eye. Her co-workers, the guests, even Steve, the manager. No one had said a word. No one had stepped in. And as much as she hated to admit it, Jasmine realized she was no better. She'd let it happen. She'd let it slide because she didn't want to rock the boat. But now, as she moved toward table 7 with a fresh round of drinks, she couldn't ignore the unease settling in her stomach. "Hey, Jasmine." A voice called out from behind her. Jasmine didn't have to look to know who it was. She knew the sound of his voice by heart now. The smug, condescending tone of the man who had humiliated her. "Table 6. She sucked in a breath and turned slowly, her grip tightening on the tray. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since the incident, she didn't look away. The man smiled at her. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that told her he knew exactly what he was doing. It was a smile that made her skin crawl. "Can you bring us another round of wine?" he asked, his voice light but laced with an underlying sharpness. Jasmine nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, sir." She didn't wait for him to say anything else before turning on her heel and walking away, her heart pounding in her chest. It took every ounce of self-control to keep her hand from shaking as she grabbed the bottle of wine from a bar. She could feel his eyes on her, could practically feel the weight of his gaze burning into her back. But this time, she wasn't going to let him get to her. She wasn't going to back down. Her movements were deliberate as she poured the wine, trying to keep her breath steady. The sound of the liquid splashing into the glass was like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds until she had to face him again. When she returned to table 6, he was still there, his smug smile still in place. His wife, too, sat silently beside him, avoiding eye contact. Jasmine set the glasses down on the table, and as she did, she felt his eyes following her every move. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her hand steady despite the raging storm inside her. The moment she finished placing the wine on the table, the man spoke again. "You know," he said, his voice casual but filled with malice, "I'm surprised I haven't fired you yet. You're really bad at your job. Honestly, I thought you'd be long gone by now." The words landed with sharpness that sent a chill through her body. She could feel the anger bubbling up inside her, threatening to overflow. But she kept herself in check, swallowing her frustration as best as she could. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" she asked, her voice smooth, too smooth. The man chuckled. "You're still here, aren't you? I'd say I feel sorry for you, but I really don't. You know, a lot of people like you don't belong in places like this." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't just insulted her work ethic. He had insulted who she was. And he wasn't the only one who thought that way. He was just the one who had the audacity to say it out loud. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, something inside her snapped. The words, the rage, the humiliation, it all came flooding back at once. It was like everything she had been holding in for weeks, months even, was coming to the surface in one explosive moment. "People like me," she repeated, her voice rising with every word. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" The man's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with an air of false nonchalance. "I'm just saying, you don't really seem like the type to work here. You're out of place." Jasmine's pulse quickened, her vision blurring with a hot sting of anger. She could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her, could sense the tension thickening in the air. She didn't care. For the first time, she didn't care who was watching. "Out of place," Jasmine repeated, louder now, her voice cutting to the quiet murmur of a room. "You think I don't belong here because I'm black? Because I'm a waitress? You think this job is beneath me?" The man opened his mouth to speak, but she didn't let him finish. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "I don't belong here, not because of my job, but because of people like you, people who think they can treat others like crap and get away with it." The restaurant had gone deathly silent. The other diners were staring now, their eyes flicking between the man and Jasmine, unsure of how to react. Steve, the manager, appeared at the edge of the dining room, watching the scene unfold with furrowed brow, clearly debating whether to step in. But Jasmine didn't care. She was done being quiet, done being invisible. "I'm not your servant," she spat, her voice shaking with emotion. "And I'm sure as hell not here to put up with your racist nonsense." She could see the surprise on the man's face, but it was quickly replaced with anger. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jasmine didn't wait for him. She turned on her heel and walked straight to the kitchen, leaving the clattering silence of the dining room behind her. Her heart was pounding, her breath ragged. She didn't know what would happen next, but she didn't care anymore. The breaking point had come. The hours after confrontation with the man at table 6 were a blur. Jasmine had retreated to the back kitchen, her body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. She hadn't expected the outburst, hadn't expected to stand up for herself the way she did. But now that it was over, a strange feeling had settled inside her, both fear and a sense of liberation. The anger that had been building up for months, maybe even years, had finally spilled out. There was no going back now. She leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to steady her breathing. The buzz of the kitchen around her felt distant, muted. She couldn't think clearly, but one thing was certain. Everything had changed. The way it would have just happened. The words, the silence of the room, Steve's absence, was pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. She'd crossed a line. But did it even matter if no one was listening? Jazz, you all right? Tamika's voice cut through her haze. She was standing by the prep table, looking over at Jasmine with concern in her eyes. Jasmine hadn't even realized how much time had passed. She blinked, trying to focus on her co-worker. I don't know. I said something. Something I shouldn't have. Tamika shook her head, stepping closer. No, girl, you said exactly what needed to be said. Don't you dare think you overstepped. Jasmine let out a shaky breath. But now what? Now that I've said it, what's next? What happens after this? Tamika's expression softened, and she crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Look, I've been here a long time. I've seen all kinds of things. But what you did today, that's something different. I've been quiet for years, letting people talk down to me, letting things slide. But you called it out. That takes guts. I wasn't trying to be brave, though, Jasmine said, shaking her head. I was just so mad. It felt like everything came out all at once. I couldn't hold it in any more. Tamika looked at her with understanding. That's how it happens. We can only bottle it up for so long before it spills out. And trust me, when it spills, it makes a difference. You think you were just being angry, but you stood up for yourself, and for everyone who's ever been made to feel small. That's a big deal. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Tamika was right. She had stood up for herself, for once, but she wasn't sure where that left her. She'd taken a step, but the consequences were unclear. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Steve entered, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Jasmine almost immediately and walked over to her, his expression neutral but guarded. Jasmine, he said, his voice low, we need to talk. Jasmine's stomach turned and her pulse quickened. She had known this was coming, but she didn't expect it to hit so soon. The fire in her chest from the earlier confrontation flickered back to life, but now it was mixed with a heavy knot of anxiety. About what? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She knew he wouldn't be on her side, but she couldn't let him see how much her hands were shaking. Steve glanced around the kitchen, making sure no one else was listening. About what happened in the dining room. I get that it was a tense situation, but we don't handle things like that here. You can't just yell at customers, Jasmine. Jasmine's heart sank. This was it. She could already feel the walls closing in, the small, familiar feeling of insignificance creeping back. I didn't just yell at him, Steve. He called me a clumsy one, and then made a racist comment. You heard him, she said, her voice rising slightly, but she quickly took a deep breath to steady herself. And no one said anything. Steve's face tightened at her words. He looked over his shoulder again, his hand rubbing the back of his neck nervously. I heard what he said, but you know how it is. He's a regular. People like him. They bring in money. We don't want to upset the guests, especially not ones who spend like that. Jasmine's stomach churned. He was protecting the customer, the one who belittled her, humiliated her in front of everyone. She had known he wouldn't side with her, but hearing him say out loud felt like a punch to the gut. So, what? I'm supposed to let him walk all over me because he spends money here? She asked, her voice shaking now, the sting of the conversation, and everything else breaking through. I'm not saying you should let him walk all over you, Steve replied, his tone defensive. But there's a way to handle these things. We have to keep it professional. Jasmine. Professional? Jasmine's voice was bitter. You want me to stay professional while people like him treat me like I'm less than them? That's your idea of professionalism. Steve's eyes narrowed. Look, I get it, but you can't go around confronting customers like that. It's bad for business. It's bad for you. Jasmine felt her frustration building. She had been so sure, so confident in her decision earlier, but now the words felt hollow. Was it really worth it? Was it worth losing her job over something that no one else seemed to care about? But something deep inside her refused to let it go. She had to say it, had to make him understand. No, she said firmly. What's bad for business is letting people like him treat others like they're beneath them. What's bad for business is letting that behavior continue and doing nothing about it. You know what's really bad for business? People thinking it's okay to walk all over someone just because they can. Steve opened his mouth to respond, but Jasmine didn't wait for him. She turned and walked away, her steps deliberate, her heart pounding. She had no idea if this would cost the job, if she'd ever see a change. But she knew one thing for sure. She was done being quiet. And that small spark inside her, the one that had been smoldering for so long, had finally caught fire. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jasmine's mind raced with everything that had happened. The confrontation, Steve's dismissal, the quiet mutterings of her co-workers. It all churned in her thoughts like a storm that wouldn't let up. She could feel the weight of the decision she was facing pressing on her chest, suffocating her. She hadn't just spoken up in a moment. Now she had to decide what to do about it. After her shift, Jasmine found herself standing in front of her apartment building, staring up at the pale, flickering lights. She didn't want to go inside. She didn't want to face the silence of her small space, the familiar feeling of isolation that came when she was alone with her thoughts. Her brother, Malik, was usually around to offer some comfort or distraction, but tonight he wasn't home. It was just her and the storm inside her head. Jazz. Malik's voice echoed in her mind. You got to stand up for yourself. You can't just let them treat you like that. But how could she? How could she stand up to all of them? The customers, Steve, the manager who had essentially told her to shut up and keep working. The fear of losing her job, of being labeled a troublemaker, hung over her like a dark cloud. She could already see the whispers, the side-eye glances from her co-workers. Jasmine could feel the weight of all their expectations bearing down on her, all their silent judgments. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the contact list. She could call in sick. She could quit. She could disappear and leave it all behind. But deep down, she knew she couldn't run anymore. Jasmine took a deep breath and tapped the number for Malik. It rang twice before he answered. Jazz? What's up? Malik's voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, like he could sense something was off. I don't know what to do, Malik, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I made a scene today. I told Steve what happened, but now it feels like it's all just going to blow up in my face. Malik's response was immediate. Good. It needed to blow up. I don't know. What if I lose my job? What if no one ever takes me seriously again? Jasmine's voice cracked, a mix of fear and frustration bleeding through. You've been putting up with this for far too long, Jazz, Malik replied, his voice steady but firm. They've been walking all over you, treating you like crap, and you've just been sitting there, hoping it'll get better. But it won't. Not until you make it. You got to keep pushing. They need to know that you're not going to take it anymore. Jasmine closed her eyes, holding the phone tighter to her ear. She could hear the conviction in Malik's words, and it sparked something in her, a fire that had been smoldering, one that was starting to burn hotter, brighter. But what if it cost me everything? Jasmine whispered, the question hanging in the air. If you don't stand up for yourself now, you'll lose everything anyway, Malik replied. You'll lose yourself. And I don't want that for you, Jazz. Jasmine bit her lip, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She'd been afraid of what would happen if she stood up to Steve, afraid of the consequences if she didn't just stay quiet and do her job. But now, something inside her was changing. She wasn't just fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for the right to be treated like a person, not a servant. I don't want to be afraid anymore, Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to be, Malik said softly. You're not alone in this. You've got me and you've got yourself. And that's enough. The words washed over her like a balm, soothing the jagged edges of her anxiety. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, she felt like she had a clear path forward. The weight in her chest had lightened, even if just a little. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions any longer. She wasn't going to let them silence her. Thanks, Malik, she said, her voice steady. I think I know what I need to do. Good. You've got this, Jazz. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, her gaze drifting upward toward the stars that barely broke through the haze of city lights. It was late, but she couldn't sleep, not yet. Her mind was buzzing with the decision she had to make. Tomorrow was a new day, and she had to face it with her head held high. As the night stretched on, Jasmine felt a sense of resolve settling into her bones. She had always been the one to take the back seat, the one to endure, to keep her head down and pretend everything was okay. But not anymore. She walked to her front door and entered the apartment, the familiar scent of incense in her half-empty coffee cup greeting her like an old friend. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the small space she had made her own. This was hers, this little piece of the world where she could be who she truly was. She wasn't going to let it all slip away. The next day, Jasmine woke up early, feeling the weight of her decision pressing on her. She was determined. She had to do something, take control of the situation, or risk losing herself to the same silence and fear she'd always known. She pulled on her uniform, the fabric familiar but no longer comforting. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, a woman on the edge of something new. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She was done being afraid. When she arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere felt different. The usual hum of activity felt distant, almost hollow. She wasn't sure if it was just in her head, but it didn't matter. She had a purpose today. She walked into the manager's office with a sense of quiet determination. She wasn't going to let Steve brush her off this time. She wasn't going to let them pretend she didn't matter. As she stood there, ready to speak her mind, one thing was certain. Her fight had only just begun. The morning had been heavy with the weight of unspoken words, the thick tension in the air as Jasmine walked into the restaurant. She had come in early, knowing she couldn't wait until later to take action. Today was the day she was going to make them listen, whether they wanted to or not. The kitchen was already buzzing with activity, the sound of knives chopping and pots clanging filling the space. Jasmine glanced around as she moved toward the back, feeling the familiar unease creeping up her spine. The murmurs from the staff were already starting, whispers that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She had no way of knowing if the rest of the staff had heard about the confrontation the night before, but it didn't matter. Jasmine had made her decision. She wasn't going to let their silence or indifference keep her in check. Her heart pounded as she walked to the back hallway, headed toward Steve's office. She'd never been this nervous about anything in her life. What would he say? Would he fire her on the spot? She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her bills piling up, but she couldn't afford to stay silent either. She had come too far, said too much, to back down now. The door to Steve's office was cracked open. She could hear him talking to someone inside, his voice muffled by the wood. But she didn't hesitate. She knocked once, then pushed it open slowly. Steve looked up, his brow furrowing as he saw her standing in the doorway. "Jasmine," he said, his voice neutral, but there was a hint of annoyance in his tone. "What's this about?" "I told you I wanted to speak with you after yesterday." "I need to talk to you," Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. She wasn't backing down now. She could feel the power of her own words, the heat of the fire inside her. "About the way you handled things last night." Steve sighed, leaning back in his chair as he motioned for her to sit. "Listen, Jasmine, I get that you were upset, but you need to understand that you can't confront customers like that. It's bad for the restaurant, and it's bad for you. We can't have disruptions in front of the other guests." Jasmine's jaw tightened. "You're more concerned about the customers than me, aren't you? You're more concerned with their comfort than making sure that people who work here are treated with respect." Steve's eyes narrowed, his patience thinning. "This isn't about respect, Jasmine. It's about professionalism. You have to learn how to handle situations without causing a scene." "Handle it how?" Jasmine demanded, her voice rising slightly. "By staying quiet? By letting people walk all over me? By letting them call me clumsy or tell me I don't belong here?" Steve stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. "Look, Jasmine, I'm trying to help you. I'm giving you a chance to understand how this business works. You think you can just come in here and start making demands, but that's not how it goes. Not here." Jasmine's eyes blazed with fury. "You're the one who doesn't get it, Steve. I've been here for months, and every time something happens, I keep my mouth shut. Every time someone disrespects me, I just smile and pretend it doesn't hurt. But not anymore. I'm not going to let it slide anymore. I'm not going to let anyone treat me like I'm invisible. Steve stared at her, his face reddening. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jasmine wasn't finished. I know what you're doing, she said, her voice steady now, no longer shaken with emotion. You're protecting him, aren't you? That customer, the one who humiliated me last night. You're more concerned with losing his business than with standing up for what's right. You're more concerned with his comfort than mine. Steve's face hardened. You don't understand, Jasmine. We need customers like him. We need the business he brings in. If you want to keep your job, you need to get with the program and stop making trouble. Jasmine felt the anger rising inside her, but this time it was different. She wasn't scared anymore. You know what I don't understand? I don't understand how you can keep excusing this behavior. How you can look the other way and pretend like nothing is wrong. I'm not the problem here, Steve. The problem is how you handle things. You're complicit in this. You're letting it happen because it's easier than confronting the real issue. There was a moment of silence, thick and tense, as Steve stared at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. This is your last warning, Jasmine. If you keep going down this road, I'll have no choice but to let you go. Do you understand? Jasmine didn't flinch. She met his gaze with steady eyes, refusing to back down. I understand perfectly, but I'm not going to let you silence me anymore. I'm done being quiet. So if you want to fire me, go ahead. But just know that you're losing more than just a waitress. You're losing someone who won't let people like you get away with it anymore. With that, she turned and walked out his office, the door slamming behind her with finality that left no room for negotiation. She had said what she needed to say. The ball was in his court now. The restaurant felt quieter than usual as she walked back into the dining area. The buzz of conversation still filled the air, but it was distant, muffled. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, could sense the tension in the air, but she didn't care. The storm inside her was building again, stronger than before. She had taken the first step. Now there was no turning back. As the morning shift dragged on, Jasmine couldn't help but feel the ripples of what she had done. She knew that things would never be the same. Some people would never look at her the same way again, but for the first time, Jasmine didn't care. The cost of standing up for herself was high, but it was worth it. There was a quiet rebellion stirring within her, one that had been long buried but was now ready to rise. And no matter what happened next, Jasmine was ready to face it. Jasmine stood at the entrance of the restaurant, her hand resting on the doorframe, her mind racing. The city outside buzzed with life, the streets humming with a constant motion of people rushing from one place to the next. But inside, everything was different. Inside, the tension was palpable, like a live wire just waiting to snap. Today was the day she would either be fired for speaking out or, somehow, gain the respect she had so desperately been seeking. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending. She had drawn a line in the sand, and now it was time to see if anyone would stand with her. As she stepped inside, she immediately felt the eyes on her. The restaurant was quieter than usual, the clinking of silverware muted by the collective silence hanging in the air. The staff moved about, their movements tense, as if they were all waiting for something. For her. Her footsteps were deliberate as she made her way to the back. She had prepared herself for this moment, had rehearsed the words she would say if Steve tried to push her around again. But the closer she got to the kitchen, the heavier the air felt. She could feel her pulse racing in her ears, but she kept walking. There was no turning back now. Tamika was the first to see her. The older woman looked up from her station, her eyes softening when she spotted Jasmine. She gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had heard the conversation from last night and that she stood behind Jasmine, no matter what happened. Good luck, girl, Tamika said softly as Jasmine passed her. Thanks, Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering nerves in her stomach. The kitchen was bustling as usual, with the cooks shouting orders and the smell of sizzling food filling the air. But Jasmine's focus was entirely on Steve's office. The door was closed, and through the small window in the door, she could see him sitting at his desk, his back turned to her. He didn't look up as she approached, his posture rigid. She could feel her resolve hardening with every step. This was it. Jasmine knocked twice before opening the door. Steve didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge her right away. He just kept writing something in his notebook. But she knew he'd been expecting her. He'd known this conversation was coming, whether he wanted it or not. "I need to talk to you," Jasmine said, her voice steady but firm. Steve slowly looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw her standing in the doorway. There was no trace of a smile, no warmth in his expression, just cold professionalism, the type of mask he had perfected over the years. "Jasmine," he said, his tone tight, "we need to discuss your actions yesterday. You crossed a line in front of the customers." Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her with a soft click. There was no point in pretending anymore. No point in holding back. She'd had enough. "I crossed a line," she repeated, her voice a little louder than she intended, but her words were clear. "No, Steve, you've been crossing lines. For months. For years. It's not just me. It's how you treat everyone who works here. It's how you let customers like him walk all over us." Steve's jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened around the pen in his hand. He took a deep breath, try and calm himself. "Jasmine, I've told you before, we don't handle things like that here. You don't confront customers. You don't make things personal." Jasmine shook her head, her heart pounding. "It wasn't personal, Steve. He was disrespecting me in front of everyone. And you just sat there and did nothing. You let it happen. You protect customers because they're paying your bills, but you couldn't care less about the people who work here. The ones who are the ones making sure your customers are comfortable, making sure this place runs smoothly." Steve stood up, his face reddening with frustration. "You're out of line, Jasmine. If you're going to keep making trouble like this, you won't have a job here anymore. I can't have someone like you creating drama in my restaurant." Jasmine felt her anger rise, but she controlled it. She wasn't going to let him push her into submission again. "Do it. Fire me. Let me walk out. But you need to understand something. This isn't just about me. This isn't just about one customer. This is about every person who walks in this door and is treated like they don't matter. This is about everyone who's ever been disrespected, ignored, or humiliated, and no one ever does a damn thing to stop it. You think I'm the problem? No, you are." For a moment, the room was silent. Steve's face twisted in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing, as if trying to come up with a response. But Jasmine wasn't waiting for him to say anything more. She had already said everything she needed to say. "I'm done," she said, her voice calm now, with a finality that sent a chill through the room. "I'm done pretending. Done letting people walk all over me. If this is the kind of place you want to run, then I'm not going to be part of it." Steve's expression soured, and for a brief moment, Jasmine could see a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe anger, pass over his face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Fine," he spat, "if that's how you want it." Jasmine nodded, turned to walk out his office. But before she reached the door, she stopped. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, the weight of everything she had said settling in her chest. She had no idea what would come next. She didn't know if she'd find a new job, or if she'd have to fight this battle all over again somewhere else. But one thing was certain. She wouldn't let this moment be the end of her story. With her head held high, she walked out his office, the door clicking shut behind her. She could feel the eyes of the other staff on her as she passed. But she didn't stop. She didn't slow down. As she stepped back into the dining area, something had shifted inside her. The air was still thick with tension, but it felt different now. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like the storm that had been brewing for so long had finally broken. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, Jasmine felt free. The day of reckoning had arrived, and she was still standing. Jasmine walked out of the restaurant that afternoon with a strange mixture of emotions. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled at her sides. The decision to confront Steve, to stand her ground and demand respect, had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. She didn't know if she'd made a mistake, or if she had done the right thing. All she knew was that something inside her had snapped, and now there was no going back. As the door to the restaurant swung shut behind her, she took a deep breath, letting the cool air outside fill her lungs. The bustling streets of downtown Boston seemed so far away from the tense, suffocating atmosphere she had just left behind. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of relief. She had said what needed to be said. She had taken control of her own narrative, refused to let them push her around anymore. But that relief quickly gave way to a gnawing uncertainty. What would happen now? What would Steve do? What would her co-workers think? Would they still look at her the same way? Would they side with her? Or would they turn their backs on her for stirring up trouble? She didn't have any answers. Not yet. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment, her mind kept returning to the moment when she'd walked out of Steve's office. His face had twisted with anger, but there had been something else behind his eyes. Something like fear or perhaps regret. Jasmine had seen it, but she hadn't waited to interpret it. She had said everything she needed to say. Now it was out of her hands. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. It was Malik. "Hey, Jazz. How'd it go?" His voice was full of concern, but there was a quiet pride in it, too. He knew her better than anyone, knew how much courage it had taken for her to finally stand up for herself. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight. "I told him everything. I told him what I was feeling, what he'd done to all of us. And then I walked out. I don't know if I made the right choice, Malik." "You did," he said immediately, his tone firm. "You stood up for yourself. That's not something you should second-guess. You can't keep letting people treat you like that. You did the right thing, Jazz." "I hope so," she replied, her voice softer now. "But I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't even know if I still have a job. What if he fires me? What if no one else has my back?" Malik paused for a moment before responding. "Listen, Jazz, no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. You did what was right, and that matters more than anything. Even if they fire you, you'll find something else. You got too much strength inside you to let this be the end. And if anyone doesn't back you up, they were never worth it in the first place." She swallowed hard, letting his words sink in. She needed to hear that. She needed to believe it, even though doubt still clung to her like a shadow. The next day, the fallout began. Jasmine woke up to an email from Steve. She had expected it, but seeing it in her inbox made her stomach drop. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before she clicked open the message. "Jasmine," it began, after further consideration, "I've decided to let you go. Your recent behavior in the workplace has been disruptive, and I feel that it's best for both parties to part ways. Please arrange to collect your belongings and leave the premises immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known it was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. She sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, her heart racing. She felt an overwhelming mix of anger and sorrow. Was this it? Was this really how her stand for herself would end? Was she just another casualty in the system that so easily discarded people like her? But deep down, Jasmine knew it wasn't the end. It couldn't be. She had worked too hard to let this be her breaking point. She closed her laptop, taking a deep breath. The tears that threatened to come never did. Instead, she stood up, walking to her small kitchen to make a cup of coffee. She needed something to steady her nerves. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. When she arrived at the restaurant to collect her things, the atmosphere felt charged with a quiet intensity. No one spoke to her directly, but she could feel the weight of the stairs as she moved through the dining room. Some of the staff looked away when she passed. Others pretended to be busy. No one approached her. No one asked her if she was okay. The silence was deafening. She reached the back office, where Steve was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked to the box in her hands, and then to her face, but he said nothing. "I'll take my things," Jasmine said, her voice steady, though her hands were still trembling. She had come this far. She wasn't going to let him see her break. Steve motioned toward the desk, where her belongings were neatly arranged. "It's all there," he said flatly. Jasmine packed her things into the box, not looking at him, not offering any parting words. There was nothing more to say. She had spoken her truth, and now it was done. As she left the office, one of her co-workers, Amanda, approached her. Her face was tight, her eyes shifting nervously. I just want to say, I'm sorry, Amanda said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I know what happened wasn't right. I just didn't know what to say yesterday. Jasmine gave her a small nod, her gaze steady but distant. It's okay, she replied, her voice calm, but there was a distance between them now. The apology felt empty, like it was more for Amanda's benefit than for hers. As Jasmine stepped out into the parking lot, the weight of the day settled in her chest. She had been fired, yes, but she had also gained something in the process. She had gained her voice, her dignity, her sense of self. It wasn't the victory she had hoped for, but it was enough. For now, it was enough. Jasmine sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her coffee mug. The quiet was deafening. Outside, the sound of traffic filtered through the window, a soft hum of a world that seemed to move on without her, as if nothing had changed. But she knew better. Everything had changed. She had been fired. Her job at the restaurant was gone, and while that was still a bitter pill to swallow, it was no longer the thing that consumed her. It had taken a while, but the sting of rejection had begun to dull, replaced by a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. She had taken the first step. She had stood up for herself in a way she never had before, and that, despite everything, was worth something. But now what? The uncertainty was almost worse than the emotional aftermath. She had no job, no clear path forward. The rent was due in a few days. Her savings were quickly dwindling, and she didn't even know where to begin looking for a new job. But she couldn't dwell on the fear. She couldn't afford to. Her actions had been necessary. They were a turning point. She just needed to figure out where to go from here. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Malik's name. She answered quickly, eager for the familiar comfort of his voice. Hey, Jazz. How's it going? Malik's tone was casual, but she could hear concern under it. I'm okay, Jasmine replied, though she didn't feel okay. It's done. I'm officially not working there anymore. I knew it would come to that, Malik said softly. But I'm proud of you, Jazz. You did what needed to be done. I don't know, Malik. I feel like I made a mess of things, Jasmine admitted, her voice quieter. I mean, I stood up for myself, but now what? What happens next? I don't even know where to start. Malik was quiet for a moment. You've already taken the hardest step. You can't let this hold you back. You've got your voice now. Don't let fear or uncertainty stop you from going after what you deserve. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She hadn't been thinking about it like that before. She had been so focused on the negative outcome, the job loss, the uncertainty, that she hadn't really seen the bigger picture. She had stood up for herself, and that was something she could carry with her. That was something that no one could take away. I'll figure it out, she said, more to herself than to him. I'll get through this. You will, Malik said with quiet confidence. And remember, I've got your back, okay? You don't have to do this alone. Jasmine smiled at the phone. Thanks, Malik. I really mean it. They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. But Jasmine's thoughts kept returning to one simple truth. The future was unwritten. It was open, waiting for her to decide what she wanted to do with it. Over the next few days, Jasmine began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, those early mornings when the weight of her decision to leave her job felt like a heavy anchor dragging her down. But each day she moved forward. She applied for jobs, scoured online listings, and even started reaching out to contacts from her time at the restaurant, asking for advice, for leads. She wasn't sure what kind of job she would land, but she was determined not to settle for something that made her feel invisible again. But Jasmine wasn't just rebuilding her career. She was rebuilding herself. She spent the next few weeks focusing on her health, both mental and physical. She began journaling more regularly, documenting her thoughts, her fears, and her hopes for the future. Each day she made time for herself, time to breathe, to reflect, to grow. The person who had walked out of that restaurant months ago, the one who had felt small and unsure, was starting to feel like someone else entirely. She had made a choice to stop being afraid, to stop letting people push her around, to stop living as though she didn't deserve more. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat in a local coffee shop working on a resume, she got an unexpected phone call. It was from the restaurant. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Her stomach twisted at the thought of hearing Steve's voice again. Had they reconsidered? Were they calling her to offer her a second chance? Her heart raced as she picked up the phone. "Jasmine, this is Steve." The voice on the other end said, sounding unusually stiff. "I just want to let you know that we reviewed your situation, and after some consideration, we're willing to offer you a new position in a different role. We've decided to extend an olive branch. We understand that things got heated, but we value your work here." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. She had expected this call, but not like this, not with the same tired promises and empty gestures. She had no desire to go back. "Thank you for the offer, Steve," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I won't be coming back." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Jasmine replied. "I've moved on. I'm not going back to a place where I'm not respected. I deserve more than that." The silence stretched, and Jasmine could almost hear the weight of Steve's frustration on the other end. But she didn't care. She had made her choice. As she hung up the phone, she felt a sense of finality wash over her. She had cut that chapter of her life loose. She was no longer bound to that toxic environment. She was free to write her own story. Over the next few months, Jasmine found a new job. It wasn't exactly what she had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. She was treated with respect, value for her work, and most importantly, she felt seen. Every day, she moved closer to the future she had imagined for herself. Jasmine was no longer just a waitress. She was a woman who had fought for her dignity and who was finally learning how to claim her place in the world. The future, though unwritten, no longer felt daunting. It felt like something she could shape. And for the first time in a long time, Jasmine was ready to take it on.